Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this author interaction organized as a part of the NLF Reading Challenge 2021. My name is Janvi, and I'm a reading specialist at Neve Academy. We are very excited to be here and hope you are too. The NLF Reading Challenge is a 6-month-long reading event from January to June 2021 for students between 10 to 13 years of age. It's open to participation on the competitive and the non-competitive tracks, and we have students from across the country participating in this challenge. In addition to fun book-based activities and regular author interactions, the challenge will conclude with a quiz competition that will see the 3 best teams win gold, silver, and bronze engraved trophies respectively, certificates of achievement, and a great set of books. Before we dive into this interaction, we would just like to point out to our audience that this is a webinar and we will not be able to respond if you raise your virtual hand. Please do type in your questions in the Q&A box. In fact, if you have questions ready, please feel free to type them out right away. If you are a student, a teacher, or a school librarian, please do mention the name of your school along with your question. We're sure that all of you are eager to start with this session, but before we do, we would just like to acknowledge that our country currently is going through very difficult times, from the cyclone to the pandemic, but we hope that these sessions are a small breather for everyone who is watching. We hope that by helping us think about the characters in the books that we love, these sessions can possibly play a role in viewing our lives and the world around us a little differently. Today, we have with us a very special guest, Vinita Coelho, whose book, All of Me, all of us have read, or at least most of us. Vinita works with images, words, and paint. She's a writer who has worked in film, television, and literature. Her works include Boy Number 32, which won the Hindu Good Books Award for Best Fiction for Children in the year 2020, Dead as a Dodo, which won the Hindu Award Good Books for Best Fiction for Children in 2016, and the Bal Sahitya Puraskar for 2020. Washer of the Dead, a collection of ghost stories, was long listed for the Franco Corner Award, and All of Me won the Neve Book Award 2020 in the Junior Reader category, and it won the Pick a Book Children's Choice Award for 2020. As an artist, she works with charcoal and acrylic paint on glass. Vinita lives in an old house in Goa, a Portuguese old house. And apart from writing and painting, she also loves to travel. Although the pandemic has put a pause on her great adventure, having converted a tempo traveler into a caravan, which she and her daughter have been traveling across India in stages. We welcome you, Vinita. We are very happy to have you with us today.
Very happy to be here. Hey, there you
Hello.
are. Hello, everyone.
Hi. Thank you so much for making time, and I'm just glad that the cyclone hasn't taken away power for too long. I know that it was for the last week. It was a bit of a scare. Would you like to read some bits from the book? Great. I'll put the screen to you.
I've written many books, but this cover has to be my favorite. I'm going to read from the beginning of the book. For those who haven't read the book yet, the book starts in darkness and our hero is locked away in darkness. And we hear a whole lot of voices, which we will discover later, the multiple personalities that are inside his head, which he's just created to be able to survive being underground and in darkness for so long. So I'm going to try and do all the voices. I hope it works. It's been quite some time now, said Miss Trent. 5 days, 7 hours and 32 minutes, said the infant prodigy. That is 6 breakfasts, 6 lunches, 5 dinners and 5 teas that we missed. I'm very hungry. The darkness was dense. The belly of the house lay underground and no sunlight reached it. The passage of days was left to the calculations of the infant prodigy. The candles had run out 3 days ago. They were down to their last bottle of water. Sounds a bit like us in the cyclone. The rats had been getting bolder. They could feel sly touches of whiskers, of cold paws as the rats skipped around them in the dark. There was a sudden flurry in the darkness and a shrill squealing. "What on earth is that?" said Mr. Pickwick. "What have you got in your hand?" "A rat," said Skinner. "Put it down this minute," said Miss Trent. "It's got disease, plague, death upon it." "It's got meat upon it," said Skinner. "We have to eat something." There was a shriek from Miss Trent. "Don't you dare put that rat in your mouth. I shall wash your mouth out with soap." "You shouldn't say dare," said the infant prodigy. "Then he always does it." "Please, I beseech you, dear boy." "Oh, I shall faint. You can't eat rats." "There ain't anything else, is there?" Mr. Pickwick intervened. "He will come. He always does." "He hasn't come for 4 days," said the infant prodigy. "The organs of the human body sustain permanent damage within 6 days of starvation, and we haven't eaten in 4. We have to get out." "We're starving to death, that's what we are," said Skinner. "What are we supposed to do?" "Pray," said Mr. Pickwick fervently. "Is any amongst you afflicted? Let us pray. Is any merry? Let him sing. Psalms chapter 5, verse 13. "Bah," said the infant prodigy, squeezing a huge amount of scorn into the word. "We're starving to death and you want us to be merry and sing?" "We could break down the door," said Skinner, "and get out." "Out," said Miss Trent. "Out," said the infant prodigy. "Surely you don't mean out by ourselves," said Mr. Pickwick. They hadn't been out of the cellar in years. The thought of going out into the world startled and upset them. A flicker of memories moved through their minds, memories of light and wind and green things. The boy spoke for the first time. "If we stay here, we will die. We have to do something. Let me think." No one said a word. They all listened to the boy. There was silence for a moment, and in that silence, they heard a crash and the sudden thud of footsteps. "Blimey, someone is in the house," said Skinner. "Someone has come for us," said the infant prodigy. "Someone has come for us," said Miss Trent in dread. They listened intently in the dark, straining to hear the sounds. The footsteps fumbled and scraped. "Come on," said Skinner. "It's our chance. They can open the door. We can get out." "Uncle said we were never to go out. He said it wasn't safe," said the infant prodigy. They sat in troubled silence while the footsteps echoed overhead. "We cannot stay here," said the boy, speaking up again. "We have no choice." Everyone fell silent. Overhead, there was a sudden thump and a scream. "They've met Horace," said the infant prodigy. Horace is a stuffed tiger that has been carried all the way from India to England. So that's how the story begins. Castor will be discovered, he'll be taken out of the darkness, and then his whole journey towards figuring out why he was locked up will begin. There you go. Now I'm ready for questions. I hope you have nice questions for me.
Yes, thank you so much for that extremely engaging read. Like I've always imagined whenever I've read this in different voices, and thank you so much for doing them in different voices, which leads us to our first question. There's such precision involved in crafting of these characters, especially these characters within Castor. How challenging was it to design these characters, and what made you envisage like such distinctive personalities living within one person?
Okay, so actually it was quite difficult, especially at the dialogue stage, because each character has to sound different. Mr. Pickwick, in the Bible, Miss Trent has to sound like a hysterical woman. The infant prodigy has to sound like a really stuck-up, very arrogant boy. So I did several passes for the voices. But in terms of designing the characters, it was actually quite easy. That's because I'd been reading Jung. And if you know, Carl Jung writes about the various archetypes that we have in our minds, characters that we exist in our own heads, our own personalities, which come out into the open when we're fractured by some traumatic event. So it was, I really followed his range of characters. So Mr. Pickwick is the mentor, and there's the little child. All of them are based on that. So they're based on quite a bit of studying of psychiatry. But the voices were something that one listened to carefully. And I had a lot of fun. I looked up Victorian slang. I looked up the Bible, which I haven't done ever since I was like 10 years old. So my mother was very impressed. "You're reading the Bible." I said, "Mother, don't get hopeful. It's only for a book." So all the voices came together.
Lovely. Were these characters based on also people that you encountered, or
Well,
along the way?
the book is actually also a homage to Dickens, Charles Dickens. And, you know, some of the characters are based on his characters. So very much Skinner is the artful dodger. You know, so I was actually channeling Dickens rather than pulling complete characters out. So a lot of that came from there. He was one of my favorite authors. And we were in school when we did Oliver Twist. And my God, I totally fell in love with him as a writer. So he still continues to inspire me.
How lovely. Continuing on this idea of characters, this book also touches upon the aspect of a dissociative identity. A child is suffering from something like that. Was it challenging to write on this subject, especially for a young audience, so that it doesn't become confusing, it doesn't become alienating? What was your approach? I know that you've mentioned about psychiatry. I'm sure how did the research go on for such?
I started the completely wrong way, I have to tell you. So first I sat down and I found every book that I could read and read all these large tomes of psychiatry and, you know, the human psyche, etc. And I got so filled up with all kinds of scientific research that I simply froze. And then I said, why am I doing this? Because I have to tell a story. The research should always serve the story. So I threw away all the books and I said, okay, if I was telling a story, what do I do to make this exciting? What characters excite me? And then, of course, you know, you're holding the research at the back of your head. So at the back of your head, you know, these are the kind of archetypes you want to use, but you have to let the story tell itself. So yeah, it was only when I started thinking, oh, let's make this an exciting story. Like make one of them very cheeky. Let's make one of them arrogant. He knows everything. What if you had an infant prodigy? My God, how much fun would that be? So once I started having fun with the characters, I was able to make them work. And, you know, also their journey. While at one level it is a psychological journey, but you have to tell it as a story of they go through an adventure. And as a family, they come apart as a family. And then finally they come together as a family. And at the end of the story, Castor realizes that, you know, these are all bits of me. And I don't need them, but they're fun to have around. He becomes whole. So all that was actually very story driven. It was very plot driven. I stopped thinking about this as being connected with any kind of, you know, mental issues. I told it as a story. And that's really what made it work finally, I think.
Absolutely. In fact, Jagdish Warrior, he's just mentioned a question here which says that if Castor had different personalities in just one physical person, isn't it possible that its mind could explode? By explode, I mean undergo further mental damage. And in that respect, I just want to add this bit that apart from all the characters that existed within Castor, Joshua, I felt, was a very pivotal character in terms of, you know, was a companion, sort of a caregiver. So what role do you think those characters or those people, in fact, in our real life also play to?
Yeah. You know, I love Joshua because Joshua is so ordinary. He's just a good, decent human being. And he just decides that he's going to be there for Castor. And that's what we need in our lives as well. You know, you just need good human beings who are there for you when you're going through a lot of grief. You don't need the counselors and you don't need the fancy stuff. You need the person who just stands there solidly. And I also like Joshua because Joshua has challenges of his own. He's very shy. He's doing stuff he's never done before. It's quite clear that he's a terrible policeman. And he's terrified of heights. So he fights his own battles and he does that to be able to help Castor. So I'm very fond of that character for his sheer decency. He's just your regular guy.
Yeah, for sure. I'm also completely sold to Joshua. Moving away from the characters of people, the book also tells us about characters of places. Like they're full of quirky places, from the cellar to the secret garden, the hidden attic. And it's humorous, it's eccentric, but they're furthering the story in every minute. Like, you know, even the place description, the way it is. And I also know that your house is right next to a river as well. So did this all feed in to your crafting of these places? How do you craft places like this? How does a writer do that?
It's really strange. I spend a lot of time on story and on characters, and I never spend time on setting. I guess because I also paint and draw visually, that just comes. And all these settings just came, you know, the secret garden. I just got this image in my head of birds hanging from strings. And I was like, what is that? I said, oh, it's a secret garden. And I got this image of my head of standing on a red tile roof and looking across the top of London. I said, oh, there should be something set up there. So I'm just lucky, I guess, because I draw and paint all the time, my visual sense just kicks in. And a lot of my writings, almost all my books have started that way. They always start with a couple of images. And then I wonder, what the hell is this image? And 2-3 images, how do they connect? And then slowly the story starts to reveal itself. So for this, it was the image on the top of the roof. It was the image of the secret garden. And it was an image of light, which I could see in ripples of water. And I was like, what the heck is this light? And then right at the end of the book, I realized, oh, it's a diamond, and the diamond has to be in water. So somewhere, your story sort of exists, and you excavate it as you go along. So yeah, my settings come. They just come. I'm very lucky. I get this guided tour of these fabulous places that somewhere in my head have grown all by themselves.
How lovely. I would like to live in your head that way and see those visuals. In this, Ahan Goyal from Neve Academy, he has asked, how many drafts and redrafts did you have until you got to the final draft, which is used for this book?
This was a difficult book. I'm normally a 3-draft person, but this took a lot of drafts, mainly for the voices. I had to go back then. I do a full pass for, Mr. Pickwick's voice, and I do a full pass for Miss Trent's voice. And this took a lot of drafts. It also took a lot of time. I normally turn my books around pretty quickly. This one I wrote, and then I realized that I wasn't yet a good enough writer to be able to pull it off, and I put it away. So it was actually about 5 years in the writing. I took a complete break for about 4 years and then came back and did it all in one go. But it took a lot of drafts. Like you did just one draft for a Victorian London, Victorian England. You just did a full draft trying to go through holding that authentically. It was writing. So I'm so glad it's won some awards, because my God, the amount of hard work that went into this book.
Oh, lovely. We're glad too that it has won so many, and I wish for more for it. I also, for this, in your past interviews, I've read that it's not actually inspiration, but anger that drives you for writing. And in fact, in the acknowledgement of this book, you've mentioned that how angered you were by this entire colonial ignorance, arrogance rather, that Mr. David Cameron had when asked about the Kohinoor. And in fact, in your previous books also, like Dead as a Dodo, you mentioned that it was cruelty for animals, then the wrong against poor people. This is all issues that you've driven by. And in our audience, there are a lot of young writers, and they would be keen to know that how do you channelize a strong emotion like this into a piece of craft, whether it's writing or painting even?
I think there are 2 issues there, really. The first is that you must have something to say. You can get very, very angry and be inarticulate in anger. But I think it helps that once you've got past being blindingly angry, to think it through and have something to say, to have a stand. That's important. I also think that when you're really very angry about something, any kind of strong emotion is boiling through you, it's difficult to write. I do scribble to get that emotion under control, but the writing actually comes once you pass that initial huge intensity. And it's very much like Wordsworth and his Daffodils, where he says that you have to recollect them, think about them, and then you write. So it's like that. But you have to be angry enough for it to last. A huge anger that explodes and goes away is not going to fuel you. So therefore, the anger, it can't be about specific instances. It's large. I find for me, the anger that works is the anger that's about larger issues. Because those issues don't go away. I mean, cruelty to animals, we live with it every day, and that's not going to go away. The fallout of colonialism and what it has meant to us as Indians, and how badly it has been treated. We've been treated, and how we still carry that horrible burden on our shoulders in many ways. That disadvantage has lasted till today. So, you speak up about these longer term issues. After the initial anger, you calm down, you read, you learn about the issue, and then you wait for the moment where that turns into a story. Yeah, that's the process for me. That's how it works for me. Okay, I see lots of raised hands. Are you asking me some questions from the raised hands as well?
To this, in continuation to something in this question, Mona Singh, she asked that this book promises a wonderful plot. Please tell us that how did you relate this story with the history of transportation of Kohinoor to India? And in fact, this I want to add another question which we had put together about that this book cannot be categorized in one genre. Like it works at so many various levels. That's why it's such a refreshing read in the children's book category. How have you brought this sort of a historical idea and then gelled it together with like such humor and panache into it?
Well, it totally started with the Kohinoor. I mean, that's where it all started, when old David Cameron made his very stupid remark about the Kohinoor. I got really angry. So the Kohinoor was always going to be the heart of the story. And what a fantastic heart. I mean, it's a diamond as big as your fist. It's the light of the world. I mean, what more could you want as a writer? So it was always starting with the Kohinoor. Several things came together in my head. My love for Dickens came together. I love Sherlock Holmes. I love stuff that's set in Victorian London because of that, you get that terrific feel and that mood. So then I said, okay, let's try and do this in Victorian London. Then obviously the next step was, okay, so the Kohinoor has to come there. So then I began reading about Duleep Singh, which was another thing that made me so angry. This 14-year-old boy is carted to all the way to England, forced to hand over the Kohinoor, not allowed to see his mother. I mean, he was taken away from his mother when he was 6. He didn't see her again till he was something like 30. He saw her once. So that all just fueled and, moved into the story. I think that what happens is all the various things that you're interested in kind of come together. They all coalesce. Building stories about connections. So I was interested in Kohinoor, I was interested in Victorian London, I was interested at that point in multiple personalities. I was thinking of writing a ghost story based on multiple personalities, and then boom, all of them connected, and I was able to do the plot. But for young writers, I must say this, that if you want to be a writer, you have to have a great indiscriminate curiosity. You must be interested in many things in the world. You must read lots, you must listen to music, you must draw, you must paint, you must take online classes, because all of these odd things connect finally. They all kind of go into a mulch heap at the back of your head. And in that mulch heap, your creativity is slowly starting to germinate, and it puts out very unexpected shoots. So this indiscriminate curiosity, being interested in all kinds of things in life, is where it starts from. The connections form themselves in your head eventually.
Thank you so much. I also want to ask this question about All of Me because it's a path-breaking book, and like all path-breaking works, it may have opened itself to some sort of backlash. Have you experienced any, like, have readers or parents come back to you saying that maybe this is a little bit dark for a young audience?
Not really. I've been quite surprised that nobody really pointed out the darkness when it is an extremely dark book, both thematically and, the visual themes. He's down in a dungeon, It is an extremely dark book, but I was quite aware that because it's a dark book, it therefore also has to have a really rip-roaring plot. Your plot, because so much happens, it keeps you skating above the great darkness. So plot becomes essential when you're writing with very deep themes. And I didn't think about genre at all. I never do, actually. I just think about the story that I'd like to tell. If, also genre is in itself such an artificial construct. It was actually constructed by publishers who found it easier to sell things if they said, this is now young adult and this is now thriller versus this, which is adventure story or fantasy. So I largely ignore genre. You have to be clear that you're building something that's very engaging. Then you throw whatever you like into the pot. You just have to make sure that it works at the end of the day. So, yep.
Great. You dabble in various mediums of expression, from painting to writing for film and television, storytelling, and of course, writing for young audience. Given the present circumstances, is there something that you've missed, or what has actually helped you to remain creatively charged in the last?
These have been very difficult times for us, for everybody. It's not just the being locked at home, it's the losses. It's every day you open Facebook and there are obituary announcements, and it's moving closer home all the time. And it's been very difficult, but I think one of our jobs as writers is to remember and to bear witness and to keep our eyes open. So I've not tried to escape or run away from it. And as usual, as a writer, your response to everything is story. So I have started on a series of stories that I hope will speak truth to power, will hold people accountable, because this is not just a tragedy, human tragedy. This is a manufactured tragedy that has come out of extreme misgovernance. It's come out of putting jingoism and fake patriotism ahead of saving people. And I'm angry, I'm telling you, the anger that I feel now is nothing compared to the anger that's gone into the other books. So one has had to keep one's eyes open and track what is going on. And it's been difficult. What has kept me sane really is going for long walks. Walks are fabulous. And I'm really lucky that I have a collection of fellow writers. We formed our own little writing circle. We have a Facebook page called Forever Young, which is all the writers for children in India. We're all on Forever Young. And that community has kept each other going. I think communities are so important, and we realize that when we are locked up in houses, cut off from each other, how much a community supports you, helps you grow, helps you grieve, helps you cope. So the Forever Young community has been wonderful. And there's another couple of small circles of friends that, writer friends that we've interacted with. So all of that has kept me going. If there was one thing that I really, really miss, it's cafes. I adore writing in cafes. I mean, I just love, first of all, in Goa, you have the most beautiful cafes. And it's just the right amount of distraction. You sit there and the whole world is going by. So as a very curious writer, you can watch everyone, you can eavesdrop on the conversations on the next table, and yet you're writing. It works beautifully for me. I really miss cafe writing. So from time to time, I make myself my favorite stuff from my favorite cafe. I make myself a hummus, and I make myself, pita bread, and I make myself a good cup of coffee, and I sit in my garden and pretend I'm in a cafe. Almost.
How lovely. How lovely. We have time for two more questions, and I want to ask this one that you have a book that has just launched yesterday, Dark Tales, which is a collection of ghost stories, and we have had Washer of the Dead, which was also a collection of ghost stories. Is there something that we can expect from the world of All of Me also coming out soon?
I'm actually contracted to write the next book of All of Me, and I just haven't done it. I got hijacked. You get hijacked, suddenly another book comes along and says, write me now. So, well, a couple of other books came along and said, write me now. So I wrote them. In fact, when the pandemic started, I must tell you, I decided, my God, I might die. What are the books that I have to write before I die? So I made a list, and there were 7 books on that list. And
wow.
I've managed to write. I've got 4 more to go, but I'm not dying until I've written these. I'm at it.
No. I'll be wishing for a very long life so that we get more and more such work. Before we close, we ask this to all our authors, and it has also come in from Vanika Gupta and Mona Singh, who have asked, what are your favorite books? And if you could share a few of your favorite authors that have influenced you. And if there was like just a shelf of the books that who make you who you are today, what would those titles be?
There are 2 books that really shook me up as an author. The first was the Mahabharata. I come out of Catholic background. So the most we did was read Amar Chitra Katha Mahabharata, one of those. And when I was in college, I picked up a version and I read it, the Raja Gopalachari version. Because I was doing English literature, and they had been telling us, oh, here is Beowulf, and here is, Achilles, here is the Greek epics. And I was like, wow. And then I read the Mahabharata and I was like, this blows away any other epic. It is stunning. And for the first time, I came out of such a convent-educated, Oxford-looking education. For the first time, I realized, look at what we have in our country. Look at our epic. Look at the depth of what we have achieved. It was fantastic. It was, for me, such a revelationary moment. And I turned around and started reading Indian epics and, mythology, and it was opened a whole channel of discovery for me. And the second book was Salman Rushdie's Midnight's Children. Yeah. Up till then, every book featured foreign protagonists. It was set in London, or it was set in America, or it was set in Los Angeles. And if there were Indian writers writing in English, they were writing books that were very geared for a foreign audience. There is very sahib type. And here was a book that had a rip-roaring, mythical, magical plot, and everyone spoke like we spoke. They spoke in, the way we use Indian English with slang, with bits of Hindi in between. And I was like, oh, that's allowed. You can tell your own stories, because up till then I thought I have to tell a Sahib type story to get published. And I was like, wow. So for me, that was permission to write the way I wanted to write my stories, featuring people from my life and my country using their words. It was fabulous. So these are two very seminal books for me. On my bookshelf, well, Neil Gaiman for sure. A marvelous author called China Miéville. A bit of a tough read, but my God, he's fantastic. He's so good that they invented a new genre for him. He writes in a new genre called the New Weird. So he's on my bookshelf. God, it's such a big bookshelf, actually. Jonathan Stroud is on it with Bartimaeus and The Outlaws, Scarlet and Brown, and all of his work. Indian authors that I would put on my bookshelf. Well, Salman Rushdie, without a doubt. And of course, R.K. Narayan. I mean, again, I read him very late, was I like, oh God, there's going to be one more Sahib type book. And it was fantastic. He's funny. He is so clever. He's so warm. So R.K. Narayan is very much on that list. Oh, my bookshelf is very big. I mean, it'll take me half an hour to get through it. So I'll start you off with that lot.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Vinita. Thank you so much for your spirit, enthusiasm, and all your generosity for spending this evening with us. I'm sure that the young audience has taken away a lot. If there are any more questions, we would write back to you with them, and we hope our audience will get a response. Thank you so much for being a part of this today.
Very, very welcome. Absolutely my pleasure. Bye, guys.
See you. Take care. Our next event is with author Kate DiCamillo. She's a two-time Newbery Medal winner. On 25th May, Tuesday, 6:30 p.m. We'll be discussing her book, Beverly Right Here, which is on the Reading List Challenge for NLF 2021. Please do follow us on our social media handles to receive regular updates on our forthcoming events. Thank you again for joining us today. We look forward to interacting with you soon. In the meantime, please stay safe, take care, and happy reading.